I'm joined by Tim Nikolaev, Chris Coggin, two front row dads, Austin family, leaders of Peak, and many other those. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you, Johnny.
All right, so let's start with just a little, who are you for those people who don't know yet? And let's try a new format. We've never done this before on the show, but it's a little bit about your family, a little bit about your business, and then a little bit about just what's fun for you in life. So 3-part bio, as quick as you want it to be, a little bit about your family, a little bit about your business, and a little bit about what you do for fun. Chris, you go first.
All right. I'm Chris Coggin. A little bit about my family. I have a wife and 3 children, 13, 10, and 7. That's a little bit about my business. I've worked in the private equity space for about 12 years, and I got out of that about 3 years ago. And so now I'm dedicating a lot of my time and energy to education, particularly for Peak. Third thing.
A little bit of fun.
A little bit of fun. I love being outside. This is my backyard, and I love being out here and other outsides.
Yeah. And when you're outside, what would be like your go-to? You write out your perfect day. Are you on a paddleboard? Are you hiking?
I'd probably be on a mountain bike.
Yeah.
Would be my perfect day.
Dude, I'm so glad I asked that. We need to make that happen.
Yeah, I love
that would be a lot of fun. That would be good. I was in Park City doing a site visit for our spring retreat. And dude, Phil Bolander took me on this ride, which like I've been on a mountain bike on a mountain like a handful of times. And he took me up to this double black diamond. It took us hours to get to the top. And then we bombed this hill and he was just going crazy. And it was 20 minutes of straight bombing the hill. And there was at least 3 times when I thought I was just going to fly off the edge. And yeah, it was no mercy. He was ready to go.
Yeah. If you don't fall every once in a while, you're not trying hard enough.
Yes, dude, it was intense, man. I look forward to some mountain biking with you. Tim, a little bit about your family, a little bit about your business, and a little bit about fun.
I have 5 kids, 13, 11, 10, 5 and 1, 3 girls, 2 boys. And I am married to Melissa. So that's kind of our family. We also live with my mom currently, my grandfather, and lots more family members trying to fit into our house. For business-wise, I had a background in real estate that I kind of got to enough of business, a while back. And I'm also like Chris, kind of focusing on education and just kind of really understanding like, okay, how can you help somebody figure out what it is they're here for and how to logistically live like that most of the time? So that's the most interesting question.
So Peak right now, at least, is a junior high experience, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, roughly. And this started last year for you guys, and it was the first year of the experiment. This is year 2. When you started it last year, what was the impetus behind the Peak program?
We all kind of had a feeling that, the middle school years are just a little different, and when reflecting on my personal time during that period, it was the hardest time for me. And that was, probably resonates for a bunch of people. I learned mostly not in the classroom. When I look back, I'm like, what did I learn? It wasn't, it was a, basketball camps. It was a country house, those type of things. And I often learned not from my parents. It was these younger adultish people that I could still hang out with and learn a lot from. So, and we just thought, okay, well, how do we create an experience where it supports that? There's so many changes that are happening with kids during that age. So like, how can we create a container where we can support that? That was number 1. And number 2 is I really believe that around this age, and there was a little bit of experience with my own son, is there are things they really start to identify that they deeply care about. And there's this little choice, right? Of like, is it possible for me to pursue those things or no? And I think that's where the split is starting to happen, right? Like, am I going to just go and listen to what other people tell me and take on their idea? Or, how strongly do I want to pursue something that matters to me? So that split, I think, starts happening right around that age. So we just wanted to experiment and say, hey, like, what if we made a container that's about that?
So year one was 6 boys, right? It was 6 boys and a guide. That was experiment number 1, correct?
Yeah, experiment number 1 was kind of what would happen if we put 6 people in a room and then bought a car and basically said that school is this mobile thing.
Yeah.
And so they ran around and did a lot of physical activities and did a lot of manual labor, under the direction of a guide.
Yeah.
What were the indicators that it was working? When did you know this is a success and we're going to do it again?
For me, it was the end of year showcase. So we had a showcase. So one of the big components as well during that age, some of the biggest learning I had came from travel. It was from leaving, my comfortable space, going somewhere else without my parents, and just figuring things out, seeing how people learn, and just having my reality broken a little bit, right? Like the world's not like what I experience it all the time. So travel was a big part of Peak, and they took a trip at the end of the year to Puerto Rico, for which they prepared. They did some language stuff. They learned about the city, all those kind of things. So then at the end of the year, they presented their learnings. And our expectations, Chris, I mean, maybe you tell me wrong, like we're pretty low, right? Like if they survived, and this is like, that was awesome. And when we realized how much learning and growth and vulnerability has happened among that group of the boys, at least for me, and their guide, it was quite incredible. So that's when I was like, it's more than we thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was also my experience. And if you can imagine what that's like that was at the end of the year, by the way. So imagine what it's like to be running a new school and then an enormous tolerance for ambiguity in the middle. Are we doing this right? What have we done? There's a lot of unknown sort of things. And then it solidified it at the very end of the year that, wait a second, we're really onto something. Each kid presented their own goals. They each make goals and their own dreams, and then what they've done, in their time during the year. And it was phenomenal for me because it was a huge sigh of relief and validation that this is actually going really well.
I could just see the kids getting together and be like, guys, we got to nail this presentation, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to hang out next year. Yeah. Do not screw this up, man.
Yeah.
You don't screw this up for me. You better get this right. I can see some accountability there to keep it going, but that's great, right?
They nailed it.
That's good. They came together, right? They made it work. That's really cool. Were there I'm going to quit moments for you? Were there moments when you sat down and you're like, I'm not sure this is the right thing? Like, it's a serious questioning, not like a rainy day, but did you ever get to the point where you're like, I don't know if this is the best, we need to really consider dissolving this?
For me, there's serious questions. There's always been serious questions, because if you think about what the competition is, what's the alternative to doing this? And in my mind, the competition is homeschool. And so having complete flexibility is tempting in a lot of ways. But in the conclusion I've came to is that doing it in a community is worth all the challenges that come along with it.
Yeah. Speak to that for a moment, either one of you, about the parent piece, which I think if we want to talk about how that appears to, the group this year, it may have evolved from last year, but you have some strong opinions about the parent piece. I'm aware, as my son is part of the program. So talk about that.
So we have this belief, right? Or even for me, it's really based on my personal experience. I think kids that are entering teenage years, they have a really, really strong BS radar. They very innately sense incongruence. So, so they can hear what you're saying, right? It's like that expression, right? I can't hear what you're saying. Your actions are too loud. So they start watching, and they always watch, but they start realizing maybe like, oh, like my dad's saying like, hey man, you gotta be nice to your brother. And he's not saying it nicely. So we really thought, okay, what if our kids in this experiment can be really a mirror for our own growth? And if we use it that way, our growth will then potentially model and result into growth for the kids, right? So it's more like that type of thing. It's more like, hey, let me see what's coming up for me. I address that, and then maybe it trickles down, maybe not. So we've had a really fantastic community of parents who chose to and were willing to vulnerably use the community and the kids as that experiment together. So, and our third partner, kind of co-founder, led those meetings, and they were fantastic. I think those arguably could have been the highlight of the year, actually, for me. And I would love to hear how Chris experienced them.
Yeah, sort of philosophically, the way we were thinking about it in the beginning, I read something, and I'm not sure where this came from, but the purpose of education is having an indistinguishable community between adults and kids. And so we make the parents are required to make commitments. Hey, this is what I'm committing to. I'm committing to being a better person, better version of myself. And it's just true that whatever we tell the kids is actually not that important. It's actually what's modeled at home. So if you want your kid to learn how to play guitar and you don't play guitar, your kid may not play guitar, So we've seen that over and over. And so focusing really our attention and sort of where we really push is the parents.
Right. Yeah. Which then it builds trust. It builds trust from the kid. And then because the hope is, right, like the hope is that this does not happen. At least for me, we've had an exercise where we talked about what's an outcome of awesome parenting. And I think for me it would be like when kids struggle or whatever, that we do it together. Right. And I think it's very hard to expect them to do that if you do not do that yourself. Right.
Well, if we had the other parents here that have their kids, enrolled in Peak, what would they say if I threw the mic to them and was like, tell me about the experience? Why did you say yes? How's it going? What's it like to be part of this community? And I'm asking because I know you guys have heard them talk about it, right? They share at the parent meetings. They let you know, they're vocal. What do you think that would be maybe a consensus answer? What do you think might show up if there was a pattern that we noticed? What would the culture be?
I would say that whether that executed or not, right, whether that's perfect or not, there's a deep care and desire to create a space for kids to be fully expressed and themselves and encouraged for being that and supported in that journey. We have a variety of kids that are quite different. And, in any group, somebody is going to be the most something and the least something. Right. Whether it's outgoing, shy, loud, whatever. So I think we really deeply celebrate that. And then we'll say, and how do we now work together as a community, yada, yada, yada. But I think I was just talking to somebody else who had an experience where a teacher basically, reached out and said, hey, the kid is not fitting into this box that we have, and it's like, okay, that's valid. And I think for us, we're trying to see, okay, how do we create a box that most supports, supporting everybody's differences.
Mm-hmm.
But
when you say fully expressed, speak to that for just a minute. What does that mean to you? How do you define that? You did a little bit, but maybe unpack that more if you can.
I think when somebody feels safe, they can be fully expressed in a way of, this is how I feel about this. This is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. This is what I'm going through. This is what's challenging. And then not from a place of and make it for me, serve my needs, but it's hey, this is what's going on. I want to do this random thing that there's not a path for, and I don't know how to do it. And can you please help?
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is that it's challenging as a parent to have no attachment to the kid's outcome, which is the hardest thing in the world as a parent. I get that. But I try my hardest to have no attachment to how I think my kids ought to be. but really digging into how can I view their life and encourage them to be aligned. And that comes from this idea of, being fully expressed, as well as like each kid is different. Like I can't remember the number, but some outrageous amount of percentage of kids do whatever their parents do because they don't have exposure. So one of the primary ideas is like, hey, let's give exposure to each other's families. And so in hopes that one day they would want to do that kind of work, or think that kind of way, or whatever.
Would it be safe to say that the feeling might be something like committed to the process, curious about the person, and unattached to the outcome?
I wouldn't even say committed to a process. I would say like committed to the journey. Mm-hmm. Because process assumes there's something that's been nailed down, and I think we'll know more on that maybe next year. So, but at this point, committed to an idea that would like to create a space where people can, kids can understand like, okay, what are my dreams? And then how do I pursue them and feel supported and grounded? Yeah.
So let me see if I can recap where we've gotten to so far, just to make sure the timeline makes sense to people. So you two guys have been friends. You had kids in another school that you still have ties to and kids in and relationship with, an Acton Academy that's in Austin, right? And you both were also part of the Acton Business School. So going back a little bit, right? You have this connection through even education at a high level. You have your families tied together at another school. You collaborate, get curious around education, and ask, is there a different way of approaching education for specifically this junior high-ish age to start? Last year's the first experiment. You have 6 boys and a guide. This year, you have 7 boys, 3 girls, 1 guide. Is that correct, roughly?
Close enough.
Close enough. So about that. So you added a couple girls into the program this year. My son Tiger is part of the program. I was, it's so funny when I came to Tatiana and I'm like, this is what I want to do with Tiger and take him to peak. It really wasn't it wasn't a conversation. It was more like, this is where Tiger is going to go to school. And one of the reasons that I was really excited about it is because I knew that he was going to be moving his body. So when he was at his previous school, which I think they did a great job, one of the challenges was that while conceptually, when they lay out like, this is what happens in this school, this is what the intention is behind these activities, and here's why we do it this way. And all that sounds amazing. And there's history and legacy behind these processes and these, right? And all of this in his last school. The challenge was, though, that I looked at the spirit of Tiger and I couldn't definitively say that his spirit was alive. Like he was loving learning and education, and he wanted to go be part of this community. And he felt like he was being encouraged by people to be the best version of himself. And he was developing a growth mindset. I couldn't honestly say that. And that's not a poke at the school, because I think that not every person is cut out for that particular school. And so it might be perfect for another person that is feeling that way about themselves. But when I was learning about what you guys were doing, and that the setting goals and then reverse engineering and then figuring out, well, look, if I want to do this with my life and I know that I need to make money at that, well, now I need to learn math so that I can do that thing. And all of a sudden it all makes sense as to why I'm learning this particular piece, and I'm moving my body, and I'm part of community, and the parents get together and form this incredible bond. All that was like a hell yes for me. It was a total hell yes. And so far, my experience has been that Tiger, and I shared this with you recently, he wasn't even feeling 100%. And we're having this conversation in the morning where normally it would have been like, I'm not feeling well, I got to stay home from school. But he's like, I've got to go to school. I want to go to school. I really don't want to miss what's happening there today. That was one of the greatest, that's an indicator for me. That was like such a positive. And I'm just taking a minute to reflect here, some love and gratitude for both of you and what you've created. And the second one, which I think is worth noting, is it was very early on, and I pick up Tiger from school and he's saying goodbye to everybody. And he rolls down the window and he goes, love you. I love you. And he's telling people that he loves them. And there's initially like as soon as I heard it, I'm like, well, not sure how that's going to land with the other kids this early on in the school year. But dude, all the other kids were like, love you too, Tiger. Love you. And I was like, that's amazing. And then I started thinking like, well, why does that happen? And then I was like, we're leaving the parent meeting. And I'm like, I love you, Chris. I love you too. I'm like, it was so great because it was one example of how maybe, just maybe, and I'm not trying to take credit for it, but I am trying to tie together the modeling piece and the community piece and how they see us interact and then how they treat each other. And there's a lot of safety to be yourself in that environment right now, I feel. And through that, Tiger is really coming alive in the most positive way.
That's beautiful.
Great. I love it. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
The last thing you said, Tiger doesn't have any other option except to be himself in the space. Like
right.
we don't let him try to be anybody else. That's sort of the whole point of this whole thing.
Yeah. And, and I mean, so a couple things, right? Like, yes, like there's a lot of joy right now, right? And we're so welcoming joy. That's such a good thing to do, and like, we will see, like, there was definitely going to be all the other feelings,
totally.
Right? Like there will be days of anger and frustration and sadness. And, he has a goal that he's working, towards with some really strong consequences if that goal is not met, and that's the part, like when you mentioned this, and I kind of, Chris, and I'd love your opinion. I think when you more stay around Socratic education and you just need time and you see people go through it, you have a certain idea like, oh, this person should do this, right? Very early on. And because you can't say anything and you're just observing, with some time, you see them do something even better than what you thought was possible. And as more reps happen, you go, oh, like I actually have experience of understanding that I have no idea. And I should just let go. So for me, that was easier. You know what I'm saying, Chris? Like that's happened with business school students all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sort of two key components whenever we were starting the school is, hey, whenever I said I will be involved if we're completely Socratic, meaning if a kid comes up and asks a question, it has to be answered with a question. And then number two is some kind of entrepreneurial education, which I think is pretty deeply embedded in me. But often in traditional models of education, I think that people misunderstand and devalue what kids have to offer. And so they say it's really top down. Hey, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to think, rather than kind of coaching and prying and trying to figure out how to think instead of what to think. Laura Sandifer has a great book about Acton Academy, the founder of Acton Academy, and one of the quotes in there is, "The hungry lion runs the fastest." And I think about that all the time, where the delivery mechanism in school used to be knowledge. It used to be a teacher stands up in front and they give you the knowledge that you need. And now the purpose of education ought to be to spark curiosity in a kid so that they know that they can go and pursue whatever it is they want to pursue. And so our role is actually curiosity sort of sparkers. We want to spark curiosity in a kid so that they have a direction and they will be, they'll work on themselves to get to that direction.
Why is entrepreneurship important, even if somebody's not going to be an entrepreneur? I have my 2 cents around this, but I want to know what you guys think.
My first reaction is the opposite. To me, an entrepreneur embodies what humanity ought to be. They produce and they push the ball forward. And the opposite of that, in my mind, is a politician. A politician just talks a lot and they don't actually do anything. And so to me, if I can encourage action, risk-taking, calculated risk-taking, if I can encourage that to me moves our world forward.
Yeah. And, in my mind, if you go back just a few hundred years, like everybody was an entrepreneur, right? You got to get your own food, you got to get your own shelter. And, so like there were no salaries. But one thing that came up for me is just like, with the kids and the type of a culture that we have so far as we're building it, as we are, like there's so much credit. I think you mentioned, like, you guys started school. Well, it was a number of families. It was actually a number of families together that came together. And the kids are so much part of their families. Like at this point, I could not take much credit at all for what the school has done. Maybe like school hasn't messed up some things, but a lot of the background has been created at home and through, for their early childhood experiences. So this is just the age where we're trying to not mess that up.
Of all the parents that are involved, who's your favorite? I'm just kidding. Let's go with a different question. Sometimes when you're defining what something is, it's helpful to know what it isn't. So what isn't peak?
I have an anecdotal what isn't peak. So whenever we were discussing sort of bare minimums, was the most fire I've ever seen Tim have, which was he was furious that I would even bring up the idea that they need to overcome some tiny little hurdle. So our education system is based on what small hurdles does a kid have to jump over? And Tim blew my mind whenever he just fought back and said, no, what you're doing is you're actually setting the minimum that kids will just barely hurdle over without any understanding of just, hey, let the kids figure out how much they can do. And so it's not peak is not a bare minimum place. Tim taught me that.
I think that's fair in some ways, right? To me, it's like, okay, if everybody in the world clearly understood what their genius is, right? Like what is effortless for them, uniquely them, and it's effortless and it's fun, and they were able to support themselves doing that in their family, like so many problems would be solved, in my opinion, right? Like, so to me, it's how do we get to that? Right. And then, so it is the straightest kind of point between A and B. However, it might not look like it looks to a kid, which is like YouTuber. I want to be a YouTuber. All I'm doing from now is YouTube videos, right? This is where we come in and say, well, if you wanted to be a YouTuber, here's other things that we might want to set you up with or require. So that, if your things change or whatever, like you have the foundation on which you can build whatever it is, life you want to build. And some of those do not include bare minimums, in my opinion.
Hey, speaking of bare minimums, why did you call these guys bears?
Do you have any idea, Chris?
They actually came up with the name.
Okay.
I have a story as to why they did, and wasn't it last year they were on a camping trip? Wasn't there some bear situation that might have left an impression on them?
That story, I've never heard one story be told so many different ways. But that is one of those stories I have no idea what the story is or what's true and what's not.
Allegedly.
That's a great guess. Yeah.
That's funny.
Allegedly.
Funny. But they've had some fun together. Tiger, when he tells, one of the things I enjoy is when somebody asks Tiger about his new school, I lean in and I'm like, how's he going to tell the story? What's his story of what peak is? He's like, all right, let me tell it to you this way. We started school and the first weekend that we were together, we went camping. That blew his mind that you went camping the first weekend that he was in school. And I love that. I'm like, that's perfect. You give them a chance to bond together. You give them a chance to build rapport. We do that at Front Row Dad retreats. When people are getting involved, there's a chance to be able to just feel safe, to be able to connect with somebody, because it's so much more enjoyable to learn and grow when you feel that you have that safety and that rapport with your peers. So I love that you did that. That was really cool. And then, am I allowed to talk about what's happening in 3-ish weeks?
Sure.
All right. So the second thing he says is, and I'm going to Nepal, right? He's like, I'm going to go to Nepal. Am I saying that right, by the way? Tatiana says I'm okay. Perfect. Yeah. All right.
That's how I say it, at least. I don't know.
Either way, people's jaws hit the ground and they're like, what? For how long? What? He's like, yeah, I'm going with my school. We're going to go to Nepal for 4 weeks. And I watch him beam with pride about this is his life. This is what he's doing. And then he gets really excited to tell people that he has to pay for half of the trip. He has to raise the money, he has to make the money, he has to do work so that he can pay for half the trip. And he actually wants to tell people that, which is also an indicator and a sign of like how he is excited to take the responsibility to do that. He wants people to know this trip isn't just being handed to him and he's spoiled because he gets to go on this trip. But that is really cool. So Nepal, talk about that. Like, and here's how comfortable I am with you guys. Tiger comes up, he goes, "We're gonna go to Nepal for a month." I'm like, cool. 0 questions. I don't know where you're going. I don't know how you're getting there. I just send the passport. Yeah, Tiger, you're in good hands. These are good people. It's all great. You know?
Well, so we the plan kind of the year usually includes one main trip. So it's a big trip that they go on. It's usually multiple weeks. In this case, it's 3 weeks. And it does not have or has a very minimal amount of presence of parents. And we've experimented this with, Utah and then Puerto Rico and here. And the takeaways are, is just there's so much growth that happens from being outside of your bubble for multiple, days in a row. So it so happened and stars aligned and that this is the trip, India and Nepal is a trip this year. And it just so happens that it's in the beginning of the year, not the end. But yes, it's, we'll hope this video ages well and everybody comes home safe. And
right.
And safety is our number one concern, when going there, and yet it's a different part of the world. It's something that most of the kids have never experienced when it comes to food, number of people, language, and so, and there's going to be some challenges. So this is not a vacation by any means. So that's something that, we're working on. And this is the start of the entrepreneurial journey that, Chris is in charge of is, paying for half of it, which is what they're working on now. And guess what? If you do not raise the money and the time, you do not get to go.
Yeah, it's been really cool for them to take ownership like in that way. And it's been really cool for us because one of the rules we set up front was, hey, don't hire your own kid as few times as possible. So there's a list of jobs. And so it's really cool for me. I get emails, randomly, hey, can I come and help cut down a tree? So I've got a work day today at my house with 5 kids for 4 hours. So it's been a really cool treat for me to solidify our community by having kids over helping me work on stuff.
Now we got to the real reason that Peak was formed.
Yeah.
All right, I'm piecing it together, dude. I've stood in your backyard, Chris. You've got several acres. It needed a lot of work.
Exactly. All the kids are very strong on plow.
The rates in Austin are going through the roof. I can't afford the landscapers.
Yeah. The truth comes out. That's very wise of you to get it. Yeah.
Dude, that's so great. I'm actually thrilled that that's happening, by the way. And what a cool way for them to get to know other people's parents and to that's so great. That's perfect. Yeah, I love it, guys. How do your spouses feel about it? We haven't, we've got 3 dudes here talking. If Melissa was here, Tim, what might she say? And again, if she were, I would much rather ask her the question, but I'm just asking, like, is she supportive of it? Does she love it? Does she think you're nuts? Is she pushing back at all?
Like she is, I would say that she is really courageously working through all the things that this experiment is bringing up for her. Having your 2 kids, which right now are 13 and 11, leave for 3 weeks and go to India and Nepal without her is not, it's not in a comfort zone of the donut.
Yeah.
And what's so inspiring for me is that as a community, but individually, when she looks at that situation, she says, okay, what do I get to learn about myself through this? How can I honor the parts of myself that have legitimate concerns about, here's what we need to talk about. And then what is it about me? and my own journey, and how do I relate with fear or being far away or travel or those kind of things. So that's the game, right? That's the game that we are, trying to play. But she's inspired because I think she just sees the kids, and, so far the kids are, pretty jazzed. I mean,
yeah.
We'll see. One of the things that we realized, so we have part of the Nepal's trip is going to be this 5-day hike, and it's a hike through the Himalaya trek, and it's challenging, like physically challenging. So one of the things that we did is the kids went to the library downtown, by the river, and then they walked back, to their school, which took 4 hours. It was about almost 10 miles, which then when we looked at it, this is the longest they've walked ever, right? But the energy with which they came back was pretty surprising. It made sense, right? It was like, we're doing this because we're doing that other thing, and it makes sense. And that's how an adult would think, right? Like, okay, I'm doing this bills that I hate, but like, there's this thing that means something to me, right? And that's what's happening. And the closer we can make that connection, I think the better. So I'm pretty sure like governments and countries were ruled by kids this age at some point.
Right. Yeah. Chris, what about for you?
So I think the question of how does Elena relate to this?
Yeah.
Everybody, humans relate to things based on their own experience, right? So Elena's experience was, private school, K through 12, small, very traditional Prussian model of education where the teacher stands up and so forth. And Elena is so artistic and like expressive, and everything we're doing makes her more excited the more she learns about it. So she has a lot of input. She'll, her and Sam, my oldest son, are very similar. And so whenever Sam comes home and tells her something, she just lights up because she remembers her own experience. And that's been really cool for her to watch.
Yeah, that's cool. Would you say that because you're doing school this way, has it brought your family closer? Has it created more interesting challenges that you didn't see coming? What's been the impact on the family unit as a result of the peak experience?
Yeah, I think it definitely yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. Both because I am there and I'm observing and I'm seeing some things, and both because now Rain and Kingston are together at school. They have, they have common goals and framework, in which they are. And then we get to spend time. We get to spend time together. We actually like some of the events, like on Fridays, parents rotate to take kids out. And you just go wherever you want to go, do whatever you want to do with the kids, and basically fun is the main factor. So Melissa and I get to take these kids out, and it's just amazing sometimes. Like, I don't know how this happens, but they forget that you are in the van, and they forget
right.
You were with them, and they're totally acting. Seems like these middle schoolers act. And we're like, hey, do they know we're still here? And that's such a cool insight into like what's happening. Yeah. So, yeah.
I had the same experience driving Ocean and Razi to school last year. So they would have been like 6, 7. And dude, the two of them would just talk the entire time in the back and would say the most hysterical things, to where I just opened up a note on my phone, and every time I get to a traffic light, I would write down the next Ocean and Razi saying whatever it was, hold on. I'm actually going to, just for comedic relief, let me bring this up real quick. Here it is. Okay. So one time they said, Ocean looks at Razi and he goes, Razi, when my big brother dies, I'll get his money and I'll share it with you. Just so you know, like, that's just out of nowhere. Hey, Razi, I want you to know, when my big brother dies, I'll get his money.
That's a good friend.
Yeah. Razi and Ocean are talking about this little girl that, Ocean was like his like little girlfriend, deal. and her name is Lydia. And he goes, Razi goes, hey, when Lydia comes to see you, are you going to be handsome? And I was like, that's a really good question. The answer is yes.
Question.
Yeah. And probably the most famous one, which is hysterical. And I won't say which one of them said it, but this was the day that I knew I was writing down all the good stuff. He said, I want to live inside my butthole, but how can I live inside my butthole when it's my butthole? So there you go. These are the perplexing questions, statements, and stories of Ocean and Razi. And I'm just scratching the surface right there. So that's fun.
I would love to watch them whiteboard this out.
Yeah. And you know what's really wild is they just forget that I was there. They would just start talking and I would just zip it. And then they would just ramble about whatever it was, that they would talk about. Absolutely hysterical. That's the real story, folks. You get it here on the Front Row Dads podcast. Nowhere else are people going to reveal those types of facts. Guys, there's a lot of places that we could still go. There's a lot of things to talk about. You're two dynamic people with a lot going on in your life, big dreams, lots of history. There's obviously a lot of stories we could tell around Peak. But the thing that I want to throw out to you is this. Somebody's listening and they're going, I really wish there were a Peak in my neighborhood. Then maybe what we could do is we could take this last segment here in two directions. One is, what would you say to that person who's like, all right, I don't even live in Austin and I'm not going to be able to be part of this, but what do I do with this information? Right? Okay. Now you shared all this with me. What do I do with this? So maybe some curiosity around what might they do with this information. Right. And then the second piece of this, there is a good number of people who are listening to this that might be in Austin and might be interested in Peak and what's happening and what's going on. And so let's speak to that side also. And this is really, I'd like to wrap by, what do we do with all of what we just shared, for our listeners? What might we invite them to do? How can we get curious with them? Invitations, whoever wants to go first.
I'll go. It's for people who we haven't decided on the vision in terms of, this is an experiment. And if it works, what then? And how does it, if it's helpful to people, how does it serve them? I don't know yet. My inclination in this 2022 kind of world is, if we came up with something and it made sense and was valuable, to potentially open source it to people to use wherever they are. So, but until then, we actually need to build it. So if you're not here, one of the things that we need, and we're working now, is bringing in more guides. So we're looking for a female guide, probably in the 20s, kind of a age group that would be interested in kind of her own growth journey and her own kind of opportunity to learn through this, for this experiment that involves travel and guiding and Socratic learning and all these kind of things. So that's one. So if you're not in Austin, but you know somebody who might be interested in that type of experiment as a part of their career, part of their journey, you can send them our way. Or share this with them. And if you are in Austin, we are probably, we have a one van that fits, Chris, 14 people.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
14. So our capacity at this point is kind of 12 kids probably, with 2 guides, 6 boys, 6 girls. But then next year, we're going to be inevitably just sibling situation. We're going to, probably double that. We're going to have to buy a second van. And at that point, that's, if things go well, that's where we're going. So maybe you check out the website. If you have interest for your own kids and you're in this area, you get in touch with us, let us know. But high tolerance for ambiguity has been coming up as a prerequisite, as it does in any experiment. So,
and the website being peakcollective.org.
Correct.
Chris, what are your thoughts?
So there's a question about how to grow, and that's always a very challenging question for most entrepreneurs to answer. And so we've decided to not grow, not really scale this thing. And so what that's allowing us to do is focus 100% of our energy and time and effort into this one thing. And if it works, then we can figure out how to communicate with the outside world. But we really want to sort of create some constraints on ourselves to build something awesome here in Austin. We have some really cool plans later on down the way. I've developed a lot of interest in trade schools. So the Austin Trade School is something that we'll eventually want to build out. And there's a lot of energy separately from Peak around that. But what would I say to somebody who wants to grow or wants to be a part of it if they're not in Austin is probably just try it yourself. I kind of what Tim said. I heard an Elon Musk interview the other day, and he said something like patents are for the weak. And I thought, man, that's what I want to do. Like that, which I think is true. If we build something awesome, I do want to share it openly with the world. I have no interest in keeping it for myself, but I also don't want to build something to scale for some other location.
Right. And I mean, if you talk about the nuts and bolts of what you guys did, you had a couple of families that got together, right? A handful of families that got together. They put their kids in a house. Well, you weren't in the house last year, were you?
We're in another house.
Okay. But now you basically, like, you took one of your investment homes down the road from where you are, Chris, put the kids there. You hired a guide that you met Kyle through the gym. Was that right? Through the climbing? No, that was different. Okay. How did you meet Kyle? I'm just wondering, like, if we talk pillars and like big chunks of information.
Yeah, really, to be completely frank about this, like, these are, if you're looking at iceberg, what you're pointing out is all the things on top of the iceberg that you can see. I think it's very important to notice that underneath of that iceberg is several decades. I'm not even talking about us. Several decades of experience, perspective, passion, commitment, and just natural joy around education.
Right.
And this whole, which is manifesting in these ways. But that piece is so deeply crucial. And every day that we are in it, we're more understanding how crucial it is and how nuanced it is, and how, like, very few people in the world, I think, can A, understand it, and then B,
totally
execute and live it, because it requires a certain level of surrender. So surrender while being strongly dedicated to the process. And I'm not even talking about, myself or Chris, or just in general, just the families together. So that's why I would be very hesitant to be like, yeah, just get a house and a guide and a few people and just go to the woods.
Yeah, I think someone could probably take the raw materials we've created just as an idea and build something way different and better in its own way.
Yes.
So for us, we just say, hey, this is our experience. Do with it what you want.
Sure. Yeah. In the spirit of modeling it, I think what's important is that here's what I would project. My belief, right, is that you take hundreds or thousands of people that might hear this or get exposed to this, right? And some of those people do have a deep passion, what you just said, decades of, a deep understanding, a passion around education. They've studied this space, and they're hearing this, and maybe they're in that position where they're just going, all right, so tell me again, what were the basic building blocks? And then it is important to just go, well, what was their model? If I look at a business and I go, just break it down for me real quick. And you start asking in your consulting, you're like, so who's your customer? What's your niche, right? What's your product? And you understand the basic building blocks of it. Then you can go, oh, I basically understand what you're talking about, of how you've ultimately created this. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And one of those building blocks is extensive experiential practice of Socratic teaching.
Which you got where, the two of you?
Both of us are Acton School of Business, probably.
Is that the deepest work that you've done in that area, probably?
I mean, I use those principles in coaching sports.
Yeah.
Other place. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience in education, I didn't learn anything until I showed up at Acton when I was 24. And so I didn't even know. I remember asking the person interviewing me, what does Socratic mean? I don't even know what that even means. And then they put me on the waiting list for that question, I think. But and then I eventually got in. But whenever you have experienced it and you watch entrepreneurial people who are hungry, but they're unguided missiles, they don't know what direction to go, but they're really hungry for something. Whenever you see that and the light bulb goes off, that wait a second, I have some agency in my own experience in life. I watched that over and over as a teacher, but my first experience with it was certainly whenever I was a student.
Makes sense. So that's the part, that's challenging, is like, maybe if you want to do it, like, hey, like maybe reach out and there's some opportunities for you to guide and learn how to guide and be taught how to guide or modeled or watch other people guide. But that might be a prerequisite, at least to what we are doing.
Yeah. Guys, anything else that needs to be said that we didn't say?
We have no idea what we're doing.
The truth comes out.
I think we have a vision. I'll speak for myself. I have a vision for what it could be. And it's not from an idea of like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's more like we have a vision, and yet it's going to be led by the energy of the kids and what's needed. So like, is it going to come together that way? Who knows? Are there going to be resources and things? Who knows? But so far it's been promising and fun.
Chris, any final words?
I'll reiterate what Tim said earlier, that we just happened to be on the podcast, but in reality, the other families that we're involved with and kind of from the inception and now have just been phenomenal. I mean, we've created this almost really honestly by accident. We've created this really beautiful container where we can be honest and vulnerable with each other, and that growth among all of us has just been really unbelievable. If we were to try to plan it, it would have not gone the same way. It's been very, very beautiful.
And kind of like the model that Chris said, when he modeled his opposites of entrepreneurs and politicians, like politicians.
Yeah. Yeah.
In some way. So
we appreciate you, John, for trusting in us. You alluded to that earlier, that hey, my kid's going to Nepal, good luck, he'll be fine. And that's been a lot of our experience with families. Like, hey, we actually try to undersell. We anti-sell whenever parents want to come, just because it's such a hard thing to sign up for if you're not fully committed and have a high tolerance for ambiguity. It's going to be super challenging. But we appreciate you leading the way on that.
Yeah. Guys, thanks for the conversation. So peakcollective.org is the website. The idea is, if you're in Austin, maybe check it out. If you're not in Austin, maybe check it out. Just be inspired. From there, I think that here's my takeaway. My takeaway is that there's lots of ways to do life. And you guys are, and with others, of course, asking interesting questions and bravely stepping into new paradigms and new ways of doing things. Just because it was done this way in the past doesn't mean it has to be done this way now. And just because it worked yesterday this way doesn't mean it has to work tomorrow that way. And I think that what I hear is an amount of presence, and through the presence, a knowing of which direction to move by the collective consciousness of the group, the empowerment of young people, not a top-down approach, but a co-creation, both with the parents, both with the students, dictating their own agreements with each other, dictating their own consequences with each other, dictating their own workflow and having consequences to not meeting goals. And parents, the same thing, right? It's parents having meetings and commitments and collaboration and working together. Through that process, you are experimenting with community. And there is no right or wrong way to necessarily do that. There are some principles, I think, that would be common amongst successful communities. But what I hear is you're just bringing your heart to the table each day and saying, what's present and what are we going to do with it? That's what I hear. And that's where the ambiguity piece shows up, because it's like, well, I don't know what's going to be present today. I can't tell you what's going to show up in school or within me. Right. But if we can have an element of trust with each other, then we can just keep moving together. Would that be safe to say? Is that
I'm so thankful that you're hearing that, because that's a great summary of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And, you know, what we do know is that Kyle is going to be there. And if anybody is interested in, you know, guiding, just check out the Instagram, School Experiment. And it has a few clips of his interview, and that might give you more of a guide experience directly from him.
where is that again? It's on Instagram.
School Experience is the handle.
Experiment.
Experiment.
School Experiment. So at School Experiment is the handle.
School Experiment is the handle. And then, yeah, it's linked to the bottom of the website as well. So
cool. All right.
You'll find it, Techie.
All right, guys, we'll put all this over at frontrowdads.com. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Appreciate you. And hey, one last final question. Do you both have time for one last piece?
Yeah.
So the last piece is this. You two guys are Front Row Dads. You're part of the community. You've been in it for a while. And you know, there might be somebody who's listening to the show for the first time, or maybe the 30th or 100th time, and they are not in the community, perhaps, but they're thinking about it. Why are both of you a part of Front Row Dads when you're already pretty darn smart? You've been part of a lot of really successful communities, other communities. And outside of the fact that, you know, we know each other, take that factor out, why yes to Front Row Dads?
That's a great, this idea actually started at a Front Row Dads retreat. Whenever John, you and I had breakfast, and we sat down, and the question on the table was, what are rites of passages, and how ought parents think about those rites of passages? And that discussion led into some really cool stuff that we've really implemented at Peak. So for me, Front Row Dads has been something that has been really a catalyst for a lot of beauty in my life currently.
Thank you.
That's just one example of the many.
For me, simply, John, like the way I look at it is, you know, we have 2 retreats a year. It's 6 days. It's 2% of the year. And those are the times that no matter what force me to pause, which have been so helpful sometimes. You know, sometimes I didn't realize how much I needed it until we showed up wherever we, you know, went. And those are times just for me to reevaluate this like dad hat that is really important for me. So, and then other things are on top of that, and they're a benefit and they're fantastic. So that was one. It's just space. And then B is the people. People who are there, who go to the retreats that I know are incredible. They're really incredible humans. And there's a lot of credit that should go to you for, you know, creating that group and attracting it. And it started with you, right? Like you were like, hey, I'm going to change my life and I'm going to be about this. So that attracted certain types of people that have the same alignment, you know, and I've learned so much every time. So even though, yeah, every time I'm more and more excited because it's this compound interest of a commitment that's reflected on a calendar.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And for the first time, I should mention, people have probably heard this, at least hopefully they're hearing this, is that for the first time, we're opening up a bigger event so more people can attend, because that retreat sells out every year. The one that we have coming up in a couple of weeks is sold out. But we have one December 2nd through the 4th here in Austin at the Van Zant. All the details are at frontrowdads.com. And hopefully if somebody's listening to this and they hear what you just said about taking time away to really focus and just this immersive experience to focus on their family or things that impact their family. Like if they're focused on their business, not just growth for growth's sake, but like, how is my family impacted by my business? How do I create a business that doesn't steal my life from my family? Things like that, how to handle wealth and the legacy that you want to leave behind, emotional intelligence, all that stuff. We're going to take a deep dive in person in December in Austin. So people can go to that. That's the beauty of that event, is that we've opened it up, we've created more room, and now more people can attend. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate the conversation. And I'm sure that it will be hours before I see you in person.
Thank you, John.
Lots of love.
See you later.